Welcome back to GenZ Creatives. We're diving into another exciting episode, exploring the life of Andrew Tate and his unique philosophy, Tateism. Get ready, we're pumped to share this with you. Let's roll the clip and hope you love it as much as we do.
And today we are diving into something that's definitely gotten a lot of attention, sparked some pretty intense debate too.
Right.
It's a contemporary philosophy the sources are calling Tateism, and it's based on the teachings of Andrew Tate.
And these sources you've got, they really give a deep look into, well, its core ideas, the controversies around it, and importantly, how it suggests people should engage with the world, pursue success, freedom.
Yeah, and it feels really vital to say this right up front. Our goal here isn't to endorse this or critique it.
No, absolutely not.
We're aiming for an impartial exploration of the ideas in this specific source material. We're just unpacking what the sources say.
Exactly. We're focused on helping you grasp the concepts, how they're framed, the arguments laid out in the material.
Right.
And maybe understand why it resonates with some people, why it's become such a big cultural talking point.
Okay, let's get into it then. How do these sources even start defining what Tateism actually is?
Well, the sources introduce it as more than just ideas on a page. They call it new doctrine.
A doctrine.
Yeah, even a philosophy to be lived. It's framed like a manifesto, really, for success, masculinity, personal freedom.
A manifesto, okay.
And it's presented as especially relevant now in an era the sources seem to think often works against those very things.
And right away, the source material uses this pretty striking comparison for Andrew Tate himself. It calls him a modern-day Machiavelli.
It does. That definitely sets a certain tone, doesn't it?
It really does. What are the sources getting at with that comparison?
According to the sources, it signals that this philosophy isn't about, naive idealism. It's described as explicitly not for the timid.
Okay.
It's meant for people who want to navigate the real world, its complexities, strategically, aiming to become, as the sources put it, masters of their own destinies.
So the idea is it's pragmatic, maybe even a bit calculating.
That's the impression, yes.
Yeah.
A practical, maybe even calculating approach to life is how it's presented.
And the sources are clear from the get-go. This whole thing is both a beacon of empowerment for some
right.
and a huge magnet for controversy for others. You can't really get it based on this material without seeing both those sides.
Exactly. The sources suggest it's designed to sort of activate people, push them to break through what they see as limitations, free themselves. But its direct challenge to, dominant cultural narratives is precisely why it's so contested.
Okay, so let's dig into the core tenets the sources lay out. The first one is success. What does Tateism, as presented here, actually say about success?
Well, the sources say its view of success isn't simply about getting rich, though financial strength is definitely a component.
Right.
The main insight seems to be that success is fundamentally about escaping. Well, it's escaping what the sources call the societal matrix.
The societal matrix. Okay, what do the sources mean by that term here?
They describe it as a system.
Yeah.
A system perceived as controlling people through various means. Think media narratives, educational systems, political structures.
So things that try to make people into cogs, suppress individuality.
That's the idea presented, yes.
Yeah.
And financial success, according to these sources, isn't just about having a lot of money. It's framed as a tool for liberation.
Liberation from that matrix.
Exactly. Liberation from that perceived system.
So money's main value is its power. Functional power, not just status.
Precisely. That's the emphasis. And the sources stress that getting there isn't just luck. It requires education and finance.
Okay.
They mention cryptocurrencies, real estate, investing in the future, but critically, investing in oneself.
Investing in yourself.
Yeah. So success, in this view, is directly linked to developing discipline, foresight, and bravery.
And the sources identify a bedrock for building this success. Hard work.
They call it a mandate, actually.
A mandate. Wow.
Yeah. The insight isn't just work hard. It's explicitly about surpassing other people through relentless effort.
Right.
It means, working long hours when the world sleeps, embracing the sweat and struggle.
And they point to Tate's kickboxing background.
Yes, his background as a 4-time world kickboxing champion is used as a prime example of this ethos. The idea that you have to be willing to, quote, bleed for one's ambitions.
Okay, that intense focus definitely connects to the next point. Discipline. The sources call it the dividing line between mediocrity and mastery.
Yes, and the insight isn't just that discipline is helpful. The sources frame it as an absolute dividing line.
A sharp line.
Very sharp. It's about self-control when faced with temptation, consciously rejecting instant gratification, choosing the harder path and doing it daily.
So it's a constant practice.
Like getting up early when you want to sleep, sticking to a tough routine, investing money instead of spending it carelessly. The sources call it a daily ritual, the force that stops you from giving in to comfort or pressure.
And then there's the winner's mentality. The sources say this might be the most crucial aspect.
This is where the psychology really comes in. The sources talk about cultivating this unshakable belief in superiority.
Even when people doubt you.
Especially then. Even when everyone doubts you. Setbacks aren't seen as failures. They become setups for comebacks.
Huh. Interesting framing.
It's about building resilience, developing a real aversion to defeat, seeing every loss only as a lesson to learn from.
And they mentioned Tate's own situation.
Yeah, the sources point to his stance, despite major public challenges, social media bans, accusations as evidence of this mentality, reframing those challenges as chances to show strength, even expand influence.
So a huge part of success, according to this, is basically reprogramming your own mind, how you see things.
According to the sources, absolutely. It's about fostering intense self-belief, mental toughness, constantly visualizing success.
Okay.
However, the sources are pretty quick to highlight a necessary balance.
Ah, right, the potential downsides.
Exactly. This kind of obsessive pursuit, they warn, can lead straight to burnout. It can mean neglecting relationships, health, or even ethics.
Ethics, yeah.
The sources really stress that success is also deeply tied to how you achieve it.
Which brings us to ethics, and the source material links this directly to Andrew Tate's own legal issues, where, it should be noted, he maintains his innocence.
Right, the sources use that situation as a stark lesson. They state pretty clearly that success devoid of integrity is not true success.
So that intense drive needs limits, a moral compass.
That's the argument. It must be moderated by a moral compass, respect for others, ethical considerations. The danger they highlight is getting so fixated on the goal of success that you overlook the honorable journey of getting there. The insight is that lasting success, even within this kind of framework, needs a foundation of integrity.
So ultimately, success, as presented in these sources, it's not just about money or power. It's about achieving a state of self-respect, being able to stand tall based on how you got there.
That's how the sources wrap up this tenet, yes. The mindset, the hard work, they get you up the mountain, but integrity is what lets you stand there with dignity.
Okay, let's move to the second core tenet then, masculinity. The sources frame this by saying Tate comes along when manhood is seen as being under siege.
Right. According to the sources, he positions himself as embodying what he thinks authentic masculinity should look like today.
And what's his critique?
The sources describe his critique as focusing on what he sees as an attempt to redefine masculinity into something, well, something feeble. Something men are told they should apologize for.
Apologize for being masculine.
That's the claim. He argues the term toxic masculinity is a misnomer, that it unfairly lumps natural traits like strength, ambition, or leadership in with genuinely bad behavior.
So he thinks the real toxicity, according to the sources, is weakening those traditional male virtues.
Exactly. The sources say he asserts that men are naturally builders, protectors, leaders' roles he sees as absolutely vital for civilization.
And his advocacy for traditional roles, the sources say it's not just nostalgia.
No, it's presented in the sources as a conviction in their effectiveness. Men are described as providers, protectors. People who willingly put themselves in harm's way for family, for community.
It's taking on the heavy lifting, basically.
Taking on the heaviest burdens so others can thrive, yes. And leading not through, authoritarian control,
right,
but according to the sources, through demonstration, strength, and integrity.
Now, the sources are very clear. This particular view gets significant backlash.
Oh, yeah. Especially from feminist circles, people aligned with what's often called woke culture. The material notes he's frequently branded as misogynistic.
But the sources also report Tate's counterclaim to that branding.
They do. They make a point of reporting that he argues it's a misreading of his actual message.
What does he claim, according to them?
He claims, as reported in the sources, that he respects women. He advocates for their traditional roles nurturers, the heart of the family seeing it not as lesser, but as a partnership of complementarity rather than competition.
Complementarity, not competition.
Right. The sources say he argues strongly against gender neutrality, or like erasing gender roles entirely. He sees that not as progress, but a step backward, robbing both men and women of their unique strengths.
So his vision of masculinity, as laid out in the sources,
Yeah.
it's about empowerment through taking on responsibility.
Right.
big responsibilities.
Yes, reclaiming a position as he sees it as head of the household, taking on challenges so others in your care can flourish.
And championing those traits like discipline, ambition, resilience.
Not just for yourself, but as qualities indispensable for society as a whole. The insight the sources offer here is that this is presented as a kind of movement back towards what he defines as strength, honor, duty.
And it's meant to start a conversation.
Specifically intended, the sources say, to initiate dialogue and transform how society perceives gender roles.
The sources do point out the complexity here, though. Defining identity, especially using traditional roles, takes guts in today's climate.
It certainly does. And it means you have to confront likely misinterpretation. But the sources stress this isn't just about personal choice. It affects the community, adds to this essential ongoing discussion about gender roles.
Yeah.
The material kind of prompts the question. In chasing equality, have we maybe lost sight of the value in differences? How do we find a balance where everyone can flourish?
And crucially, the sources bring in an ethical dimension to this specific view of masculinity.
Absolutely critical point. The concept of masculinity, as presented here, must not come at the expense of others. It should promote a type of manhood that respects and enhances women's roles, not diminishes them.
Yeah.
The challenge, the sources state, is evolving these discussions, these roles, to honor everyone and contribute to the collective good.
So the insight is that this strong assertion of masculinity needs to be tempered. Consideration for others is key.
That's the ethical boundary highlighted in the material, yes.
Okay. Moving on to the third core tenet, personal freedom. How do the sources describe this within Tateism?
Well, they present Tate's view of freedom as very different from just a passive state, something the government gives you or you just happen to have.
Not passive.
No, it's an active right, something that must be claimed, fought for, lived out. It's about shattering chains, both the visible external ones and the mental chains that limit you.
And the sources say this is different from, say, more liberal ideas of freedom.
Significantly different from what they term passive liberal interpretations, yes.
Okay. And the first pillar of this act of freedom they identify is financial independence.
Right. The sources basically assert that without financial autonomy, real freedom just isn't possible.
You can't be free if you're dependent.
Exactly. They frame dependency on a 9-to-5 job or crippling debt as a form of, well, enslavement. Money, in this view, isn't the goal itself.
It's a tool again.
It's a means that must serve your pursuit of freedom, achieved through things like crypto, real estate, entrepreneurship.
And they mention Hustlers University.
Yes, Hustlers University and The Real World are mentioned in the sources as educational platforms designed to teach these financial strategies, help people escape that perceived rat race of conventional work.
So the insight is, again, financial gain is primarily about breaking free from external control.
From systems.
That's precisely the emphasis in the sources, yes. Then the second pillar is self-reliance.
Becoming your own savior, like you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. In a time the sources describe as encouraging dependency on systems, on aid Tateism champions, becoming your own source of strength, your own capability.
What does that involve? It involves gaining practical skills, cultivating serious mental toughness, and actively resisting societal pressures that push towards conformity or helplessness.
Practical skills like...
The sources mention things like car maintenance, financial literacy, building resilience. They even use his time in confinement in Romania as an example.
Oh, right.
Underscoring how his belief in self-reliance, according to the sources, stayed central even under, extreme circumstances.
And the third pillar, resistance against the matrix, that term again.
Right. It comes back to that idea of societal structures, media, education, politics that are perceived as suppressing individuality, enforcing conformity.
Trying to control thought and behavior.
That's the claim. So freedom, in this sense, means actively challenging these systems, being outspoken, refusing to conform to, well, the sources use the term woke culture.
Which in this context means societal pressure to conform to certain views.
Understood in this context as pressure to conform to certain progressive norms or opinions, yes. Freedom, according to the sources, is about asserting your right to dissent, to live by your own rules, your own convictions.
So personal freedom in this philosophy is really about taking aggressive control of your life, defying norms, living strictly by your own beliefs.
That's definitely how the sources frame it. And they note that this intense pursuit of freedom becomes a powerful driver for self-improvement.
How so?
It sparks this drive to learn, to grow, to challenge yourself, specifically aimed at breaking free from what's seen as mediocrity and dependency.
But freedom, as the sources also point out, isn't achieved in a vacuum, right? It's not just about you.
No, the sources are very clear on this. It is not a license to just disregard other people or harm them. The material really stresses that your freedom is inherently linked to the freedom of people around you.
Right.
And empathy, the sources argue, has to be a crucial companion to this pursuit.
Because it's easy to get tunnel vision, focused only on your own liberation.
Exactly. So focused on your own emancipation that you overlook the wider world. True freedom, according to this material, cannot be selfish.
It has to respect others.
It must, as the sources state, honor the dignity and rights of others. The lesson the material draws here is about contributing back to society, to community fostering unity, even as you liberate yourself.
So the ultimate vision of freedom here is being authentically yourself, but also recognizing you're part of something bigger.
That's the balance the sources describe. Forging a life free from external chains, yes, but also being internally liberated in a way that lets you help, lead, inspire others.
So it's not just escape, it's also about reshaping things.
Actively reshaping norms for what's perceived as the collective good while still relentlessly chasing personal excellence. That's the picture painted.
Okay, now let's shift gears a bit and look at the strategies Tate uses as the sources present them. These are often highly controversial.
Very much so.
The sources say he sees life as a game and believes you have to deliberately stir controversy to win.
Yes, the sources describe him positioning himself as a provocateur. They detail his approach to what they term manipulation.
Manipulation.
Which they say is used cautiously, not necessarily as outright deceit, but as a nuanced understanding of psychology. Life is chess, moving pieces.
So reading people, understanding motivations.
Exactly. Reading body language, understanding motivations to get a strategic edge. The sources give business examples, like leveraging people's desires or fears to be more effective.
And controversy itself is presented as a deliberate tool for attention, branding.
According to the sources, yes, it's considered lifeblood in our media-driven world. Actions that lead to bans, big headlines, confrontations.
Like the Greta Thunberg exchange. Or comments on feminism.
Those are mentioned. They're framed in the sources as calculated steps, designed to fuel discussion, challenge norms, keep him relevant and resonant.
And his views on relationships, the sources say these are particularly polarizing.
Extremely. The sources highlight his push for a return to what he sees as traditional gender roles: men lead, women follow. He views this as a natural, effective hierarchy.
And comments like women being property.
Those remarks are explained within the sources as being intended in the context of men taking protective, responsible roles, not literal ownership.
Okay.
The emphasis, the sources say, is on men becoming their absolute best selves as a prerequisite for attracting the right kind of partner.
Now, the sources don't shy away from the ethical implications of these strategies.
No, they dedicate a good amount of space to this. Regarding manipulation, they state clearly there are profound implications.
Delicious.
Using psychological insight without respecting someone's autonomy or dignity is presented as unethical. The sources stress there's a very fine, often blurry line between being strategic and just being deceitful.
You have to weigh the moral price tag, they say.
Exactly. Is this manipulation for growth, maybe mutual benefit, or is it just about controlling others?
And controversy, clearly a double-edged sword.
As the sources point out, it can definitely make you famous, get you attention, but they pose the question, what kind of fame?
Right. Sustainable. Meaningful.
Fame just from shock value often lacks depth, right? You can alienate people. Long term, is it just a temporary show or does it build something lasting? That's the question raised.
And the relationship views, ethically speaking.
The sources acknowledge that while these traditional views might motivate some people if they're misunderstood or misapplied, they can foster really toxic dynamics. The material stresses that balance is crucial. Traditional roles should never justify abusing power or disrespecting anyone. Relationships, they state, must fundamentally uplift both people involved.
So these strategies, while they might be effective for getting ahead quickly, as described, they demand a lot of self-awareness, responsibility.
That's the core takeaway from the sources on this. You have to constantly weigh the immediate benefits against the long-term effects on your character, your relationships, your community.
The pursuit of greatness needs integrity.
The pursuit of greatness, they conclude, must ultimately pave the way for integrity. The insight is that these tools might be powerful for getting ahead, but how you use them ethically determines the quality and lasting impact of that success.
Okay, let's shift now to how the sources suggest you, the listener, might engage with a philosophy like Tateism. They really emphasize it's definitely not about just accepting it wholesale.
No, the sources strongly push for dissecting it with a critical eye, evaluating its principles, its strategies against your own moral compass, your understanding of society, your personal journey.
And the key lesson the sources highlight here seems to be adaptation.
Exactly. It's not about blindly grabbing whatever sounds good. It's about questioning everything. Adjusting parts that might be useful, sure, but also outright dismissing things that clash with your ethics or could be harmful.
Right.
The sources frame personal growth as needing deep introspection, asking yourself, is success at any price really valuable? Or does real greatness involve lifting others up too?
And it's crucial, the sources say, that even if principles inspire you to break norms, you absolutely have to customize them, make them fit your values.
Precisely. Take discipline, for example.
Yeah.
The sources urge you. Embrace it, yes, but make sure it doesn't morph into an unhealthy obsession that cuts you off from people you care about.
Or if the idea of success motivates you.
Redefine it. The sources suggest looking beyond just money. Think about personal satisfaction, the quality of your relationships, what you contribute to your community.
So the critical engagement is asking, how can any of these ideas maybe enrich my life without sacrificing my humanity or harming others?
Yes. The sources position self-improvement in this context as actively adapting and refining principles, enhancing your life, but keeping those greater human values, empathy, community ethics firmly in place.
The goal is to be a thinker, not merely a follower.
That's the phrase they use. Critiquing, adapting, striving, yes, but always keeping the bigger picture, the wider implications, in view. The insight seems to be that true strength comes from thoughtfully merging external ideas with your own internal compass and social responsibility.
The sources actually give some practical examples of what this critical application could look like.
They do, which is helpful. Take financial independence. You hate your job, feel stuck. Tateism, as presented, says, learn about investments, crypto, real estate, cut spending hard, build passive income, escape.
Okay, but the critical thinking part.
The source's critical thinking angle adds, okay, but research thoroughly, understand the real risks, invest wisely, with foresight. Does just jump on trends because someone famous says so.
Makes sense. What about self-reliance, feeling too dependent?
Tateism says, gain practical skills, DIY, fix things, maybe gardening. The source's critical thinking adds, self-reliance is great, but it doesn't mean rejecting all help. Know when to seek expert advice or collaborate. You don't have to be an island.
Good point. How about the winner's mentality and setbacks? Your business fails.
Tateism says, view it purely as education, analyze errors objectively, regroup immediately for the next push. The source's critical thinking reminds you, success isn't only about winning, it's deeply about learning, adapting, and sometimes having the wisdom to know when to pivot or even walk away from something that isn't working.
And finally, personal freedom. Feeling trapped by norms or your career?
Tateism says, break the chains, chase your passion aggressively. The source's critical thinking insists, hold on, your quest for freedom shouldn't trample on others' rights or let you ditch responsibilities to people who rely on you. Find that balance between your liberation and your role in the community. So the conclusion the sources reach on this customization idea is pretty powerful. They say the philosophy's potential is sparking transformation.
Right, it can be motivating.
But that power needs to be handled with discernment. Tateism offers the raw elements, as they put it.
The building blocks.
But it's up to you to actively build them. Make them fit your own personal ethics, aspirations, and life circumstances.
So leveraging this philosophy, according to the sources, means taking charge, being the architect of your own life.
Yes, but, and this is the crucial but, the sources emphasize doing it with deep introspection, thoughtful adaptation, and always being aware of how your actions ripple outwards into society.
It's about wisdom, not just sheer determination.
That's the synthesis presented. The insight is that the real power isn't just in the ideas themselves, but in how thoughtfully and responsibly you apply them to your unique situation.
So we've taken quite a deep dive into Tateism as it's presented in your sources. We've explored the core ideas, success, masculinity, freedom, looked at the controversial strategies discussed,
Right.
and examined that strong call within the sources for you, the listener, to engage with it all critically.
And the main takeaway from all this material really seemed to be that significant emphasis on personal responsibility. Whenever you engage with any strong philosophy, really.
That need to evaluate ideas against your own values.
rigorously and carefully considering the impact your choices, your actions have on other people, on your community.
Which leaves us with a final thought, something for you to mull over. In a world that throws so many different ideas, different blueprints for living and succeeding at you, how do you actually navigate that?
Yeah, how do you decide which principles you want to adopt, which ones you need to adapt?
And how do you make sure the path you end up forging honors not just your own personal growth, your own ambitions, but also that interconnected fabric of society we're all a part of?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you for joining us in this episode, diving into the life of Top G, Andrew Tate. We've explored his philosophy, Tateism, and we hope you've gained valuable insights. Stay tuned for more episodes to come. You can grab our book on Amazon or Gumroad anytime. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, GenZ Creatives. Wishing you an ample dose of pain and suffering like NVIDIA's CEO. See you next time.